That same thing carries over to chapter 13, doesn't it? The idea that you need to think more about God and keep your covenants, because when a covenant people fail to keep their covenants, there's nothing but unhappiness and destruction that will come.
Yeah. Well, what do we find here in chapter 13 about some things that might justify some judgments and punishments and emptiness and desolation and hair falling out and symbols of slavery and bondage? What are they doing here? Or what are they not doing?
A few of the things, and this is something you'll find as a regular charge if you turn to verse 12 in chapter 13. And my people, children, verse 15 is what I meant. What mean ye? Ye beat my people to pieces and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord God of hosts. This is a consistent charge that they're not taking care of the poor or the fatherless or the widow. They're not taking care of his children as they've covenanted to.
Yeah, in chapter 13, two broad parts. The first half of it, he's talking more about rulers, males who are in leadership position, who oppress, who abuse their authority, who are more interested in their own selves than helping their countrymen.
Or even their family members,
sure.
They reject. Yeah. They come to their brother and he even won't help them.
Yes. The second half, the scene shifts a little more to not only are the men corrupt and insensitive to the extreme, but women have become caught up in the pride of the world and become immoral and what have you. So it's kind of castigating society across the board, the whole spectrum of inhabitants.
Yeah, these women with wanton eyes, mincing gait, and so forth. I mean, this is more than just materialism. This is enticement and seduction and all of those attributes of. And it's interesting that it doesn't just say society in general. It's the daughters of Zion. They're even imitating or following and developing these same characteristics among them.
Yeah. One of the images Isaiah uses often with daughters of Zion is that they are the covenant people who are espoused to Jehovah. As such, they should be keeping themselves pure and lovely and virtuous and waiting for him to come. But here, these daughters of Zion are doing just the opposite. They're chasing other lovers, and consequently they end up in this pitiful scene. This is just sad as it describes how they end up. They're bald, stinky, torn girdle, scabby head, sitting in the gates of the city just weeping. That's a sad picture.
And I think what Terry's done has illustrated very well something that we need to be aware of with Isaiah, that there are often multiple fulfillments of what he's talking about. So this may be able to be specifically applied to what some of the women are doing at that time, but it has another fulfillment, and perhaps an even more important fulfillment, in how the women represent the bride to Christ and that covenant relationship again. And so whenever we read these chapters, we need to look for the various ways that the imagery can be fulfilled.
So if this daughter of Zion represents the covenant members of Christ's church and kingdom, that could be male or female individuals that have some of these same types of breaking of covenants, unworthiness to receive blessings, ultimate destruction, falling by the sword, and all of these things, war and other things are going to come upon them collectively as well as individually.
Absolutely. And it ties in with what we were just talking about, and not turning to man and cease from man, because if it is representative of the covenant relationship with Jehovah, and they're turning somewhere else, as these daughters are, they're looking to entice something else, then they're turning to false gods, which are always going to be things of men. And so it's another way of saying the same thing. They're turning from God and looking towards worldly or things of men, and thus they will have these terrible things like children being their princes, or burning instead of beauty, and those things that come when you break the covenant.
Okay, now 14.
Before we get to 14, throw in one thing just to follow up on this idea. We sometimes forget that chapter 12 and chapter 13, which are Isaiah 2 and 3, begin with Isaiah saying, or at least the book of Isaiah saying, these things are going to happen to Jerusalem and Judah. That's kind of the primary focus in his prophecy, because he lived in Jerusalem and he was talking to the people of Judah. But Latter-day Saints, following Nephi's advice, we liken these prophecies. It's not just going to be Judah and Jerusalem. The temple in the top of the hills can be the latter-day or the millennial temple in Jerusalem.
Well, in fact,
but we see it as in other places
that
as well.
quote is often given from the pulpit General Conference, that it applies not only to the temple in Salt Lake, but even President Hinckley has talked about the pulpit he's speaking from in the conference center.
Right.
This is the word going out. Yeah. And so, yes, it's not just these ancient Israelites. This warning applies to us every bit as much.
Let's hope as Latter-day Saints we liken ourselves to the daughters mentioned in chapter 14 rather than 13.
Let's get there.
Because chapter 13 talks about the apostate daughters of Zion, and I think verse 1 of chapter 14 probably goes with chapter 13 as well. That's the JST does that in the Masoretic text. Yeah. But the next part, starting with verse 2 of 14, talks about the branch of the Lord. These are other daughters of Zion who stayed faithful to their covenants.
Beautiful, glorious.
Yeah.
Yes.
So instead of being ugly and bald and stinky and torn girdled, they're beautiful and comely. And
in verse 3, those who are left in Zion and remain in Jerusalem should be called holy. Yeah. Sometimes we forget as Latter-day Saints that the word saint itself comes from a Latin word that means holy, but there are Hebrew and Greek words which mean the same thing. And of course, Isaiah oftentimes refers to Jehovah as the Holy One of Israel. Mm-hmm. And through the power of covenants and the power of Christ's atonement, we can become holy with Him.
And the covenant relationship is highlighted there in verse 4, when the Lord will have washed away the filth. This washing is another way of stating baptism.
Yeah. And it ties it into the atonement that we're talking about. Like we said at the beginning, Christ and the covenants tied together here, that it is the atonement that washes the filth away, and the blood will be purged from their midst. And the spirit of burning, all of that is atonement imagery.
Well, and in the presence, this is chapter 14, verse 5 and 6, the presence of the Lord with His holy people
is inspired,
drawing on the symbolism of the Lord who was with the Israelites in the wilderness.
That's right.
The glorious
cloud of smoke by day and the fire by night.
There's a question for you. All of these things, wonderful things, happen to this branch of the Lord. They're called in verse 2. For those that are escaped of Israel, what do you suppose they've escaped from? This
We're going to get into that in a later the next discussion we have in this series, as we talk about Babylon and her enticements. And so that's kind of implied, and we'll get into that more specifically. But they have to leave the world, the natural, wicked world, and escape from sin and be cleansed, and then this wonderful protective shield of the Lord will be with them as covenant members of His church and kingdom.
So Isaiah wants us to ask ourselves now, am I a stinky daughter of Zion, or am I a branch of the Lord?
There we go.
There you go. Easy option. Yeah. He seems to make the choice awfully clear.
Yeah. Now, one of the very unusual chapters of Isaiah is chapter 5. It's really the only major parable that we have in all the writings of Isaiah, and it's called an entrapment parable. Somebody help us out. How is this an entrapment? It's seemingly a deceptive technique that Isaiah is using with his audience here.
I don't know if I call it deceptive, but it's clearly designed to draw them in and then kind of zing them at the end. 2 Samuel 12, you have Nathan the prophet doing this to David after he's committed adultery. Same type of approach there. So he's telling this story and says, "Now, what do you think? What do you think?" And then he says,
so he's making them make a judgment.
Yeah, and then the judgment,
they don't realize,
finger turns around and points at them.
They're making a judgment about themselves.
Yeah. So you have the master of the vineyard who's done everything to produce wonderful grapes. Instead it produces, on the Hebrew, be'ushim, which literally means worthless, stinking things. And he says, what shall I do to my vineyard? And I think that what immediately escapes from people's lips are, you should cut it down and burn it. Yeah.